New York Jets, Miami Dolphins, New York Jets, Miami Dolphins, everything you need to know for your fantasy teams and player projections in 15 minutes. If you've never been here before, welcome. My name is Max. I make these for every single primetime game, as well as every game on Sunday to give you a unique edge looking at coverage data, run scheme metrics, and overall statistical trends that not a lot of people talk about or look into because it relates to the schematics behind the game of football and not just the numbers that you see. Without further ado, let's get into it. As always, my picks will be on my socials. There's a link in the description for them: Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Make sure you're locked in on there. But let's talk about this game. New York Jets at Miami. Miami's 2.5-point favorites right now. The total is set at 44.5. When I looked at this Jets defense, I kind of figured that they would be pretty man heavy. It's the identity they have. You like some of the guys they have in their secondary, but I was actually pretty impressed with how well they had played in other aspects. The only outlier that I really saw was the 10th most receiver yards allowed in terms of statistics against this Jets defense. And I like it for Tyreek Hill. I like it for Jalen Waddle. When you look at their coverage data, they're running the 7th most man-to-man in the NFL. Now, Tyreek Hill's target rate, how often he's targeted, not his overall targets, doubles versus man-to-man. He also does have the most targets on the Dolphins against man-to-man. Jalen Waddle's target rate also increases. It is not a coincidence, and you can see right here that both of these Miami Dolphins wide receivers had their best games week 2 against a man-heavy team in the New England Patriots. It's not a coincidence when those teams tried to line up one-on-one with those guys, they had bigger chunk plays, their longest receptions of the year, their biggest yardage performances of the year. It's not a coincidence that happened. And now you're getting a top 10 man team where the Patriots in week 2 were just outside of the top 10. I expect that to increase and be even better for these guys. Devon Achane still has a really high target rate just in general, as you can see down here. The Dolphins are still throwing out of the backfield. That's what this B is at the highest rate in the league, but it decreases a little bit against man. Malik Washington has a heavy target rate decrease against man, which kind of stinks because I was looking at this and the only coverage rate outlier that I saw was Miami Dolphins throwing to the slot position at an average rate, but the New York Jets allowing slot targets at a top 10 rate. You want to throw away from Sauce Gardner, who's usually on the outside. I get it. However, Tyreek Hill's routes are a little more slot friendly, right? 39% of them come from the slot as compared to Jalen Waddle's around 21%. Slot targets, Hill and Washington are tied with the lead with 8 targets apiece. So I really do like Tyreek Hill in this game. I think this is an opportunity for him to showcase explosive ability, get plenty of one-on-one matchups. But truthfully, I'm a little worried about the volume. And I look at the run scheme metrics, and you and me both don't think of the Miami Dolphins as a run-heavy team. However, this Jets defense, not great against the run, 11th most yards per carry, and they're bottom 12 in both man gap and zone scheme runs. It's important there's a distinction there. We're going to talk about the Jets offense. There's a huge trend that I found with that in a little bit here, but they're both bottom 12 in the types of runs that teams will run against them. The only issue here, when you look at the raw numbers, is Miami has the overall fewest rush attempts in the NFL. You look at that number, I believe was 52, but it's the fewest rush attempts in the NFL, and you get worried. Like, Miami has a good matchup on the ground. They don't run the ball. They're not going to take advantage of it. Face value, yes, I agree. However, half of the Miami Dolphins rush attempts came in week 3, just last week, right? So 52, half, I believe was 25 in week 3, so a tiny bit less than half, but 25 attempts in week 3 and 27 combined in weeks 1 and 2. My question is, are they more committed to the ground game now? I will tell you, if you're somebody, and this is not me, we'll talk about the total and which side I'm on at the end. If you're somebody who really likes Miami, if you think the Jets are frauds or you think Miami's underrated, whatever it may be, I really like Devon Achane and even Ollie Gordon rushing in this game. Like, I think there's a real possibility that Miami pounds the rock, takes advantage of those matchups there, and gives each of those guys a decent amount of carries and work. The only issue is, in my personal opinion, looking at this matchup, I think it's going to be a close game. I think Miami is going to go back to the identity they kind of always do and throw the football, so I can't confidently lean into the volume there. But in terms of an explosive run, longest rush, I don't mind that on either or for either back in the Miami offense. In terms of the red zone data, Waddle has the most targets. Do what you will with that information. But the two comparative projections I like are both wide receivers. Tyreek Hill, 64.5. I really like that wide receiver receiving yards number, 4.5 catches for each of these guys. Again, whenever you play man teams, you kind of want to lean into the yardage, just face value. If a receiver gets one-on-one man coverage, you want to lean into that, the potential explosive play of, him torching his DB instead of a quick get the ball out zone where you lean into the receptions, that 4.5 number. However, Jalen Waddle's longest reception at 19.5, I think, is a little bit low. Again, both of these guys, Tyreek Hill is a little bit more than 20 right now. All of that could happen on one play. However, I'm leaning overall yards for Tyreek Hill because of this slot production, because of the overall slot rate and the targets that he's going to see. And I am leaning, longest reception for Jalen Waddle because I'm not as confident in the volume, but I really like the production and the fact that I think he's going to avoid any type of Sauce Gardner true shadow in a lot of situations. Moving to the other side, before I do, if you guys are new, make sure you subscribe. We have another Monday Night Football breakdown, Broncos-Bengals, in the description, but if you're seeing this before it's out, I don't want you to miss it. This Dolphins defense is, again, not bad, I guess. The roster and depth on them is not as good as I thought it would be walking into the season, but there aren't a ton of data outliers either. Like, they stink against the tight end position, and we'll walk down this list with the Jets tight end production here. There isn't much to lean into there. However, in previous games, you guys know last week we were on a Jackson Hawes touchdown. He scored. We were on Dalton Kincaid pretty heavily. He scored, but had a good game. Austin Hooper was the leading Patriots tight end against them. Fine, whatever. Hunter Henry did not have a great game, but Tyler Warren had 7 for 76. Like, the tight end position is the number one spot to attack if you're going against this Dolphins defense. Oddly enough, they play the 8th most man in the NFL. It's very different from what they did last year. It was not the identity they crafted last year. They're playing more man-to-man, even though they're allowing the 9th most tight end receptions, 6th most tight end yards, which usually feeds into a zone trend. They are playing a top 10 man defense in terms of percentage and how often they do it, not overall production. Now, on the Jets, nobody other than Garrett Wilson has more than 2 targets against man-to-man. Wilson's target rate increases against man-to-man, which obviously makes sense for a big number 1 outside wide receiver. But the other interesting thing to note here is quarterback rushing versus man-to-man, a very similar principle thing to a wide receiver beating a corner one-on-one against man. If the play breaks down against man coverage, simply put, all these DBs have eyes on the receiver that they're covering, and less people have eyes on a quarterback, which makes a potential big run or two for Justin Fields very, very much on the table because of how much man the Dolphins play. In terms of target rate, nothing really sticks out to me, right? They are getting targeted, the Dolphins defense, out wide and in the slot at bottom 10 rates in both. Like, there's no significant target rate match here. And then where they are getting targeted, the inline spot, the Jets aren't even throw there. It should be 26, not two space 6, but they're throwing there at the 26th highest rate. So the only marriage here is the backfield rate, where the Dolphins and the Jets are bottom 10 and top 10 respectively in how often they're throwing there and getting targeted there. So, like, I like Breece Hall in the receiving game in terms of his routes and his overall production. Like, he's running more routes than Braylon Allen. He has more targets, triple the targets as Braylon Allen. Like, he's still the number 1 guy. And we can go look at some snap counts here for the New York Jets. Like, it's very clear to see, even though Braylon Allen is on the field, probably more than we would like if we were to have Breece Hall on our team or lean into any of his yards. Breece Hall is still the main producer. He's still playing more than 55% of snaps in every single game. Like, I'm not wildly concerned about Breece Hall, his volume, his production, all that stuff. But when you go look at these run scheme metrics, I am very, very fascinated by the Miami Dolphins run defense, right? They are overall solid against the run, right? They're solid against the run. However, they're bad against zone runs. The 11th most zone yards per carry in the entire NFL, right? That's, you're giving the ball to Breece Hall and he's reading A to B or A to B to C on a zone run, inside zone, outside zone, whatever it may be, instead of, pullers, a man gap scheme where you're going 1-for-1 on the outside or inside, really, but outside. The Jets run those zone runs, inside zone, mid zone, wide zone, outside, whatever it is, at the 5th highest rate in the NFL, and they are almost top 10 in their own offensive yards per carry in those runs. Now, when you look at Breece Hall and Braylon Allen in those man gap scheme runs, which the Jets don't run a ton, the Dolphins are better against, it's a 50-50 split, right? They each have, I think, 4 carries. It's not a lot of work in the man gap. However, in the zone carries, Breece Hall has more than triple the carries that Braylon Allen does. Now, what's really interesting about this Jets offense is the rushing production. I'm pulling up something on my phone for you here. The rushing production, because they've had Justin Fields for 2 of 3 games, but he's banged up in the second one. They were losing in the second one. So it's hard to look at this Jets offense as a whole and feel really confident as, a rushing total. But again, I think the Jets can keep this game close. Breece Hall isn't even projected 60 yards on the ground. I don't want to go out on a limb and say that Breece Hall is going to hit that in a play, but the explosive ability is there. The yards per carry is there. The matchup is there. Breece Hall 56.5 is my favorite play from the other side. Now, I look at the other comparative projections, like Mason Taylor is the main tight end. He's got 9 targets, triple Jeremy Ruckert, but they're barely thrown to the tight end spot. I think if you want to get on Mason Taylor, it's a touchdown. I don't think there's a ton of value in receiving yards, receptions. However, in the red zone, both running backs have 2 targets. So I think there's even more value in, throwing Breece Hall in a touchdown entry or even a value Braylon Allen with a goal line carry, but also knowing he gets work in the red zone in the passing game. I think it's worth leaning into. And also for Braylon Allen, off the top of my head, I believe it's 2 of his 3 targets overall are in the red zone. And then Garrett Wilson, you go to the game logs against the Miami Dolphins. I like it. I think if you want an alternate leg in an entry like a 40 yards or even a 50, I like it. I don't know if I can confidently lean into him straight. Like you look at some of these productions against the Miami Dolphins. You got Michael Pittman with 80 yards. Cool. Okay. Nobody on the Bills had more than 50 yards in the receiver room. Nobody on the Patriots had more than 35 yards. I know the Dolphins are running a lot of man and truthfully have not played a receiver of Garrett Wilson's caliber yet. So if you're going to lean into Garrett Wilson, it's an alternate leg or it's a longest reception because they are a top 10 man rate team in the NFL. But I highly, highly suggest stay away from the straight number. But that is everything I have for this Dolphins-Jets game. If you guys did enjoy, please do leave a like. Again, we have another Monday Night Football breakdown in the description. We'll see you next time. God bless.